Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session on the EU import of horse meat from overseas. We will have today a very international session with panelists from Australia, North America, and of course, Europe. We would like to thank all of them for accepting our invitation despite the time difference. Before we start, let me share some housekeeping rules with you. This meeting is streamed on Facebook. There is no interpretation, so all those who want to intervene, please speak English. Please keep yourself muted during the meeting and add your questions using the Q&A function, and they will be addressed at the end of the session, moderated by Eurogroup for Animal CEO Anja Hazekamp. If you are an MEP and you wish to take the floor, please let us know by using the chat box or raise your hand if the function is available to you. The webinar will also be recorded, and the video recording and the presentation will be published on the Intergroup website after the session. The import of horse meat from overseas to the EU is a crucial topic. Numerous of NGOs investigations carried out since 2010 in horse meat producing countries of North and South America and in Australia revealed non-compliance with applicable EU requirements regarding animal welfare and traceability. Horses are systematically neglected and mistreated. Animals of unknown origin, even stolen horses, are slaughtered for export to the EU. The European Union has already suspended horse meat imports from Mexico and Brazil, following audits carried out by the European Commission. Repeated EU audits in other exporting countries have identified very similar animal welfare and food safety issues as in Mexico and Brazil. 3 months ago, more than 30 MEPs from all political groups have tabled written questions regarding the import of malicious horse meat from Argentina. However, we are still waiting for answers from the Commission. It is time for the European Commission to impose the same measures against all countries that do not fulfill its import conditions. So let's now listen to our speakers of today's session. I would like to introduce you to our first speaker, Anja Hazekamp. Elio is campaign director at the Coalition for the Protection of Racehorses in Australia, and he will be with us today to present the topic of horse meat production in Australia and the animal welfare issues related to that. Elio, the floor is yours for 8 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today about this very important issue. My name is Anja Hazekamp and I am the Campaign Director for the Coalition for the Protection of Racehorses. Racehorses are the primary source of horse meat for human consumption that is exported to the EU. There are 2 slaughterhouses that kill horses for human consumption in Australia. Merrimist in Queensland is the main exporter at the moment and is the focus of this presentation. In some cases, horses are transported over distances exceeding 2,000 kilometres and 30 hours of transport without being unloaded, often in extreme heat and humidity, and without water. If a horse is injured or becomes ill during transport, there simply isn't the ability for the horse to be treated or removed if necessary. This in itself is a significant welfare issue. Some horses sustain serious injuries during transport and arrive lame, while others don't make the trip. Many horses are kept at assembly centres like this one until it's time for them to be sent to slaughter. There is no veterinary care and there is only minimal shelter. At this point, the horse is just a commodity, and inevitably, some will die on the property. These are the typical conditions that you'd find at a kill buyer's property in Australia. There is little or no grass or shelter. In a 2-year investigation we undertook in 2018 and 19 at Merrimest, more than 57% of horses were identified by their brands as racehorses. And of the 236 horses that had had their microchips covertly scanned during the same time, 9.7% had raced in the previous 30 days, while a total of 27.7% had raced in the previous 6 months. Statistically, this means that more than 15% of all horses killed at this particular abattoir were racehorses that had raced in the last 6 months prior to being killed, and very likely to have drug residues present. The horse vendor declaration form is required by the slaughterhouse as evidence that the horse has been drug-free for 6 months. However, they are easily falsified. Some livestock sales, like the biggest horse auction sale yard in Australia, the Echuca Saleyards, does not provide vendor declarations, and yet horses sold at these auctions have been discovered at the abattoir, meaning that the vendor declarations provided to the abattoir have been falsified. This practice is known to be common. And the person in this video is one of the main kill buyers in Australia who regularly buys horses from Echuca. This demonstrates that the EU rules currently in place in Australia are not protecting consumers and pose a significant health risk, especially when one considers the endless list of drugs used in the racing industry, both legal and illegal. And this has been acknowledged by the EU final report of an audit carried out in June 2019, and it states, "Indeed, the recommendations regarding traceability of previous audits have not been properly addressed, in particular concerning the reliability of the medical treatment declarations included in the horse vendor declarations. The system of traceability is not able to provide guarantees that the horse meat is free of drug residues." There are, of course, many other issues. What is of great concern to our organisation is the treatment of the horses at the abattoir. Our 2-year investigation that took place revealed many animal welfare concerns and breaches of the Australian law and EU requirements. Here's some examples of what we found happening occurring on a regular basis and captured in over 1,000 hours of covert video surveillance. To give you an idea of the brutality that faces the horses hours before they will take their last breath, here's a short video. And just a warning that the footage is confronting. I won't be speaking to this as it speaks for itself. I do recommend you do watch The Final Race, a documentary that first aired in October 2019 about horse slaughter in Australia that highlights in detail the serious animal welfare concerns in the slaughter of horses in Australia. There are links to the documentary and others on our website, horseracingkills.com. That's it, everyone.
Well, thank you, Elio. This was a very impressive video. And thank you for opening our eyes and showing us the appalling situation of horses in this part of Australia. Since we have no questions from the MEPs attending today, let's move now on to our next speaker. Let me introduce to you Sonja Meadows. Sonja is president and founder of Animals Angels, an NGO working throughout the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Sonja will explain to us what the situation is for North American horses and addresses the slaughter pipeline areas of concern. Sonja, the floor is yours for 8 minutes.
Thank you so much. Dear members of parliament, dear guests, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak about the North American horse slaughter industry. For the last decade, Animals Angels' focus has been on what horses go through in the slaughter pipeline. This task has led our teams to all the relevant horse auctions, feedlots, and slaughter plants in the United States and Canada. The documentation obtained during these visits, paired with extensive research into the paperwork attached to each slaughter horse, has allowed us to gain valuable insights into this secretive industry. Today, I would like to share some of these insights with you. For most horses, the slaughter pipeline starts at one of the 100+ horse auctions across the US and Canada. The cruelty also starts here. Slaughter horses are commonly kept in large pens, holding 30 to 50 horses of all sizes, genders, and backgrounds. Things are quickly in an uproar, and the sometimes brutal fighting leaves many horses limping and injured. Auction employees are often afraid of these agitated animals, which results in excessive use of whips or sticks. Food or water are also rarely available. After the sale, the horses are loaded onto aluminum cattle trailers that can hold up to 40 horses in one single transport. These trailers have no individual stalls and no access to water. Aggressive horses fight for space. Horses slip and fall and are trampled to death by the surrounding horses that have no place to go. The temperatures in these trailers can soar up to 60 degrees Celsius in the summertime, and heat exhaustion is a real danger to these animals. The transport lengths are also very different than those in the EU. In North America, horses can be transported for up to 28 hours without food, water, or a chance to rest. Once the horses arrive at the kill buyers' feedlots, their ordeal only gets worse. The temperatures where the main feedlots are located can drop to minus 36 degrees Celsius with a wind chill factor of minus 55. At most feedlots, there's no cover, no dry resting area, no protection from the elements, not even for the pregnant mares or their little foals. Our teams have documented dead, newborn foals frozen to the ground during multiple visits. Some of these feedlots hold thousands of horses, which creates problems. Hoof care is virtually non-existent. and many horses have overgrown, cracked hooves. The chances to detect sickness, injuries, or mares giving birth in a timely manner are extremely slim. During every single one of our investigations, severe animal welfare problems were detected, which makes it questionable if these horses receive adequate veterinary care or if these horses are euthanized when in obvious distress. Our observations include sick or injured horses, horses with open infected wounds, or horses with signs of an advanced strangles infection, a highly contagious disease that usually requires segregation of the affected animal. And several visits found dead horses, with scavengers feeding on their carcasses in the middle of the other live horses. It is also important to point out that EU-approved slaughter plants and the pen areas directly adjacent to these plants have to comply with EU animal protection regulations. Unfortunately, to date, these regulations cannot be applied to the thousands of horses that are awaiting slaughter in all the other feedlots. A very upsetting flaw in the current system that should be changed as soon as possible. Once the horses arrive at the plant, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, the local authority in charge, examines the animals and the required paperwork. The previous owner or the horse trader who acquired the animal has to fill out a so-called equine identification document, attesting that the horse has not been treated with certain veterinary substances for the last 6 months prior to slaughter. However, how do you ensure that the information provided by these individuals is even accurate? And how do you fact check the statements made regarding the origin of the horse or the medical treatments this horse has received? In my opinion, with the current system in place, I think it's next to impossible. And I'm not alone with this opinion. When the EU Commission carried out an official audit in Canada in 2018, they concluded, and I quote, "The information contained in several of the EID documents appeared incomplete and unreliable, which affects the reliability of the guarantees provided by the competent authority that horses slaughtered in Canada for export to the EU have not been treated with banned substances before slaughter, or that the withdrawal periods of veterinary products had been respected." So to summarize it all, Animals Angels investigations have shown over and over again that there are grave animal welfare concerns along every step of the North American horse slaughter pipeline. No animal should ever have to endure what these horses go through every single day. However, if that's not convincing enough, the EU Commission's own audit confirms that severe traceability issues still exist and that Canadian authorities at this point cannot guarantee compliance with applicable EU requirements regarding drug residues. We therefore call upon the EU Commission to take action and to immediately suspend all horse meat imports from Canada. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Sonja. It's quite right what you said. No animal should endure the suffering that these animals go through. It's absolutely heartbreaking. Reineke, I'm looking at you. Are there any questions for the two previous speakers so far, or shall I continue?
Yes, Anja, there is a question to Elio, and I'm sure there will be others for Sonja in a moment. People are still taking in your presentation, Sonja. But for Elio, Dawn is asking, given the poor standard of regulatory enforcement in Australia, Do you think there's any way of improving the conditions in transport and at slaughter for the horses in Australia? And what is the Australian government doing about all these issues? Can you unmute yourself, Elio?
My apologies. Australia is a very large country, and it's very difficult to police what happens during transport. And there just seems to be a total lack of regard at the abattoir end when we keep on seeing repeatedly horses being treated badly. Since the video was taken that you saw on the screen, we've found that the same conditions are still prevalent, and it's going to take the EU to really convince the Australian government that if they don't change what they're doing at the moment, that they'll withdraw the import of meat from Australia. It doesn't seem to be a genuine will from the Australian government or the horse slaughter industry itself to make any real improvements at the moment.
Thank you, Elio. And I think this is also a topic that could be brought up within the margins of the negotiations between the EU and Australia. So thank you for bringing this to our attention. Anja, I think we can go to the next speaker.
Well, thank you, Reineke. Our next speaker is Sabrina Güdner. Sabrina is the project manager at the Animal Welfare Foundation based in Germany. And she will be with us today to talk about the investigations done by NGOs in South America and the latest EU audit results. And she will also present their petition demanding a suspension of the import of horse meat. Sabrina, the floor is yours for 13 minutes.
Dear members of the European Parliament, dear guests, I'm honored to be invited today to talk about horse meat production in South America. I'm a project manager at Animal Welfare Foundation and Tierschutzbund Zürich, two sister organizations in Germany and Switzerland. We've been investigating horse meat production in Argentina and Uruguay since 2012. Unfortunately, and despite the promises of European importers to improve animal welfare with new manuals and audits, the situation remains unchanged. 9 years after our first investigation, the severe abuse and neglect of horses continues on the same level. In Argentina and Uruguay, horses are mostly traded through auctions and markets. Sometimes the dealers buy them directly from farms. They keep the horses at their assembly centers until they have a full truckload, which can take days or even weeks. The assembly centers do not currently have to comply with EU welfare standards, except those which belong to slaughterhouses. Animal welfare conditions are generally poor. Horses are exposed to extreme weather conditions, and the supply of feed and water is usually insufficient. We documented injured, sick, and weak horses left without veterinary care. Horses are left to suffer and die instead of being euthanized. In one picture, you can see a mare that died while giving birth, left without any supervision. In 2018, an EU audit in Argentina highlighted animal welfare concerns at assembly centers. The report states, I quote, the occurrence, move away. The occurrence of death of horses in assembly centers over a substantial period of time without being recorded or detected implies that official services would not be aware of possible animal welfare or other issues and not be in a position to intervene in a timely fashion. As you can see in this photo, a large number of horses die in assembly centers before being sent for slaughter. Currently, EU welfare standards also do not apply to the transport for slaughter. The vehicles used to transport horses in South America are open cattle trailers, which are totally unsuitable. They pose a high risk of injury. The horses are transported over long distances without water or feed, especially in Argentina. They are not transported in individual stalls as required in the EU on long distance transport. If horses fall down during the journey, they are often trampled to death. Horses that are unfit are usually transported regardless. In the photo, you can see an electric prod being used to load horses at an auction, making them panic. EU-approved slaughterhouses in third countries have to comply with EU welfare standards. However, our observations in South America over the past 9 years show that they often do not. Former employees of a slaughterhouse estimate that there are downer horses on about 2 out of every 10 trucks, which often arrive at night. They are dragged with chains from the trucks and left to die in the unloading area. If they are still alive in the morning, they are carried into the slaughterhouse inside the shovel of a tractor. This is a serious breach of EU standards, which require that animals unable to walk must be killed where they lie, in this case, inside the truck. In the first photo, you can see a horse dead on arrival. If the horses are dead, the chain is fixed to their neck. If they are still alive, to their legs. In both cases, they are pulled off the truck without a ramp being used. The horse with bleeding head injuries died the same night. We observed many other non-compliances with EU requirements. The handling of the horses is often violent. They are beaten, sprayed with water jets, and receive electric shocks. In the pen area, severely injured and sick horses do not receive any care, and some die. The pen floors are dusty or muddy, depending on the weather. The horses have no bedding and thus no clean and dry resting areas. There are many risks of injuries, for example, from wire fences or slippery floors in the raceways. In addition to grave welfare violations, there are also serious concerns regarding traceability and food safety. In Argentina and Uruguay, the consumption of horse meat is prohibited. The horses are slaughtered for export only, and they are purchased from legal and illegal sources. They include work horses, rodeo horses, blood mares from PMSG production, race horses, stolen and smuggled horses. Since horses are not considered to be food-producing animals, they are commonly given drugs, especially sport horses. The traceability system in place is unreliable. It only relies on the honesty of horse owners and dealers who give sworn declarations on medical treatments administered in the last 6 months prior to slaughter. Horses are marked with ear tags only shortly before being sent to slaughter. In addition, the national traceability rules are not enforced, and we still find horses without ear tags at assembly centers and slaughterhouses, even though they should be ear tagged when leaving the farm of origin. This means that horses of unknown origin and with an unclear drug history are slaughtered for export to the EU, which poses a high food safety risk for European consumers. The identification system fails to guarantee traceability, opening the door to fraud. Since 2002, media have been reporting about stolen horses ending up at slaughterhouses in Argentina. In March 2020, for example, a dealer delivered 20 horses to the Lamar slaughterhouse. At least 6 of them were stolen. The horses were marked with ear tags and had falsified declarations on medical treatments. They were confiscated by the police and returned to their owners. Organized crime relating to horse meat production is systematic in Argentina. A former policeman estimates that around 50% of the horses sold for slaughter have been stolen. The newspaper Al Sur reported about the case from March 2020 and stated, "Behind this lucrative business is a mafia that begins with the horse rustlers, continues with the dealers, and ends in the slaughterhouses who look the other way when admitting ill-gotten animals." The audits of the EU Commission and importers are announced in advance. Therefore, we observed slaughterhouses before, during, and after inspections in order to detect changes. All plans got prepared for announced audits. For example, provisional shelters were built, which broke down soon after the inspection. Injured, sick, and emaciated horses were removed from the premises, and healthy animals replaced them. All horses present during the audits had the mandatory ear tags. Often, the assembly centers were emptied completely before the audits. The latest EU audit reports about Uruguay and Argentina confirm our observations. In both audits, it was evident that the competent authority manipulated the image presented to the inspectors. This type of manipulation is systematic. The photo shows a severely injured horse that we saw at Clay Slaughterhouse before and after an EU inspection, yet during the visit, the paddock was empty. The most recent audit reports of the EU Commission come to the following overall conclusions. I quote, "The official controls in the assembly centers do not ensure that EU and national welfare requirements are met. Full traceability of live horses destined for slaughter for the EU market is not ensured, and the shortcomings identified do not allow the competent authority to provide assurances that they meet relevant EU standards. It is unacceptable that the EU Commission, who finally came to realize that audits are manipulated, is still hesitating to take action. An import suspension from Argentina and Uruguay is well overdue." Together with other international animal welfare organizations, we launched a petition on change.org that calls on the EU Commission to suspend the import of horse meat from countries that do not fulfill EU import conditions. As you can see, the petition has already collected almost 120,000 signatures. The petition video shows the most important areas of concern. Repeated EU audits and NGO investigations have shown that Argentina, Australia, Canada, and Uruguay do not comply with applicable EU requirements relating to animal welfare and traceability of horses. This is why we call on the EU Commission to suspend the import as an immediate measure, which means to remove these countries from the list of third countries from which the import of horse meat is permitted, since they cannot guarantee compliance with the applicable EU animal welfare requirements. As a longer-term measure, The EU should require equivalent animal welfare standards in exporting countries, not only for slaughter, but also for transport and assembly centers. And for reasons of consumer protection, the EU should suspend any horse meat imports from countries where the traceability system used only relies on declarations of horse owners and dealers. The EU has already suspended horse meat imports from Mexico and Brazil as a result of EU audits in these countries. Audits carried out in the other exporting countries identified very similar issues regarding animal welfare and food safety as those in Mexico and Brazil. For example, the EU requirement that horses must be traceable for 6 months prior to slaughter is not respected, and official controls do not ensure that relevant EU standards are met. The burning question is why the actions taken by the EU Commission following these audits were so different. Why did one audit lead to an import suspension and the others did not? Could it be because of the free trade agreements with these countries? It is time for the EU Commission to impose the same measure against all countries that do not fulfill their import conditions. The EU must ensure its rules are respected. We would very much appreciate if you could support our petition and calls on the EU Commission. So far, the Commission has declined our meeting requests to hand over the signatures, even online. We urgently need your support on this matter. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Sabrina, for your interesting presentation. And I agree, we are wondering ourselves why the European Commission does not act on all the findings of themselves and of all the NGOs. And I wonder too if the free trade agreement with, between the EU and Mercosur countries plays a role in this passive way the European Commission acts. Reineke, I believe we have some questions.
Yeah, we do, Anja, and I suggest to take one looking at the time, but there's also a lot of praise for all the investigative work that has been done by all the organizations presenting today. So I would also like to mention that you keep up this very important work. And there is a specific question to Sonia. Sonia, Joe is asking regarding North America, do you have any views on the merits or otherwise of the US recommencing inspections and US horse slaughter plants reopening? Would you like to comment on that?
Absolutely, yeah. Proponents of horse slaughter often claim that, oh man, things were so much better when horse slaughter plants were open in the United States and the USDA carried out inspections. But I have been to those plants when they were open. I followed the transports when they took place, and I can guarantee, you know, horse slaughter on American soil is no more humane than any place else, or it is inhumane no matter where it takes place.
Okay, so for you, this wouldn't be a solution. Okay, thanks for that. Anja, I think it's time for our next speaker, but to everyone who is listening, feel free to add your questions to the Q&A box, and we hope we can come back to them at the end.
Thank you, Reineke. Yes, our next speaker is Daniel Perez Vega. Daniel is Program Officer on Trade and Animal Welfare at Eurogroup for Animals. He will present today the report on horse meat imports done by Eurogroup for Animals from stable to fork. Daniel, the floor is yours for a maximum of 8 minutes.
Many thanks, Anja. Good afternoon, everybody, and many thanks for the opportunity of presenting today. I will not go into the details of the animal welfare and horsemeat issues that were already raised by previous speakers, but I will rather focus on how the EU can use trade as a tool to improve the welfare of as many horses as possible in third countries. Next slide, please. Before starting the presentation, I'd like to briefly mention that the trade program has existed since the creation of the WTO in the mid-90s, but our work has significantly increased since 2015. And I'd like to use this opportunity to thank our members that we can see here for all the support in our work. One of the things we do is to raise to EU institutions issues about animal welfare and to put forward proposals. For instance, in the report From Stable to Fork, where we explain all the issues around horsemeat imports. Next slide, please. You cannot see it in this slide, but the EU is the biggest consumer of horsemeat. But consumption has been decreasing over the past decade. Certainly, the horsemeat scandal in 2014 contributed to this. Following the trend in consumption, imports have also decreased for various reasons, including the ban on imports from Mexico, implemented in 2014 due to issues about identification, traceability, and residues. The volume that used to be imported from Mexico has not entirely been replaced by other origins, which actually shows that sometimes it is useful to ban imports from specific countries, since these imports are not necessarily replaced by other origins. And an interesting point to note is that since the ban on imports in Mexico, production there has also decreased. Maybe I can come back about this later if we have the time. So to wrap up, as I mentioned earlier, imports to the EU have been decreasing over the past decade from nearly 45,000 tons in 2018 to a bit more than 16,000 tons since 2017. Next slide, please. Today, there are only 4 countries exporting horsemeat to the EU, and Argentina is by far the biggest supplier. The other origins are Uruguay, Canada, and Australia. Now, what is interesting for this presentation is the trade state of play of these countries with the EU. Argentina and Uruguay, as part of the Mercosur, have negotiated a trade agreement with the EU that is not yet into force, and we don't know if or when it will be ratified. Australia is currently negotiating a free trade agreement, and Canada has a trade agreement provisionally applied since 2017. And why is this important trade-wise? Because there are 2 or 3 ways that trade agreements can have an impact on animal welfare. Next slide, please. The first impact is tariff liberalization. When negotiating a trade agreement, tariffs on horsemeat are usually removed because the EU wants to liberalize as many products as possible. And while the tariff is only 6%, it probably does not have much impact on trade per se, but removing the tariff does send a wrong message to third countries where minimum welfare standards for slaughter animals are not met. The tariff with Canada was removed. Very likely with Argentina and Mercosur, within the EU-Mercosur agreement, the tariff will be removed, but we don't know this for sure because we haven't seen the text yet. And with Australia, we have called not to remove the tariff, but as I said, the EU tends to do so because horsemeat is not considered a sensitive product, and trade agreements must liberalize as many products as possible. A second impact a trade agreement has on animal welfare are all the cooperations on animal welfare foreseen in the agreement. And these cooperations can actually be a real opportunity to raise the issue if they are actually used. For example, with Canada, where the agreement is already in force, discussions have taken place on animal welfare, but the EU has not yet raised the issue of horsemeat. Another impact could be in the provisions of this PS chapter. These chapters can facilitate audits, which are the only way to check animal welfare, by, for example, simplifying audits or conducting audits specifically on animal welfare as it used to be in the past. The EU could also use this PS chapter to raise issues on food safety and traceability, which in some cases, as shown by previous speakers, there are clear violations of EU rules. And finally, another impact outside the remit of trade agreements could be a restriction on trade based on animal welfare considerations. It might be difficult to argue, but I think it's possible since the WTO recognized that trade can be restricted for animal welfare issues. Next slide, please. So, how can the EU use trade as a tool to improve the welfare of horses in third countries? We have a few recommendations. First, rules must be respected. It's important for citizens, it's important for consumers. In the case of trade, it means that there must be a compliance with EU animal welfare standards at slaughter. Otherwise, imports must be suspended. Another recommendation, it is to better use the tariff liberalization. As I said, when negotiating a trade agreement, tariffs tend to be removed because the EU wants to liberalize as many products as possible. But this sends a wrong message to third countries. The EU should rather liberalize products only that respect animal welfare standards. So it should condition the liberalization to animal welfare standards. Another recommendation, to improve the SPS provisions because they can influence the way audits are carried out. And as I said, audits are the only way to check animal welfare. And if there are provisions on animal welfare cooperation, the EU should raise the issue, like with Canada. There have been discussions on animal welfare, but not on horse meat yet. And finally, improving traceability under the SPS committee, that is the committee implementing the SPS chapter. So I will stop here, but I'm happy to take any questions or comments if there are any. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Daniel. We have made the report available in the chat box, so you can find the link there. And I'm very much looking forward to read the report. Reineke, do we have any questions?
Yes, well, in fact, we have a question about the horse slaughter in Canada, and that's also nicely linked to your presentation, Daniel, because indeed the EU is still in the final process of ratifying its agreement with Canada, and clearly when we have seen the presentation from Sonja, the Canada is not in compliance with the EU's rules on origin and traceability. What can be done, do you think? Because you mentioned that animal welfare can be discussed, but this sounded all very loose. So are there hard measures the EU can now undertake?
Sorry, that's for me, Reineke, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I mean, I think a first thing would be to bring this subject up to the COP regulatory forum. It sounds a bit loose, but indeed it should be taken there. There is the forum for discussion between the EU and Canada, and we have been asking for this. So that should be a first subject, a priority there. Now, as the ratification is ongoing, I believe from the Parliament done, but member states should also have a voice there, because there's still discussion going in national parliaments about this agreement. And I think that's a political discussion to have, but it is important.
Very good, thank you, Daniel. Yeah, there are some more questions, but I also know we have a final intervention. So I suggest we first listen to that and then see what more questions we can still take.
Okay, I don't see any final intervention here, so
okay,
maybe you can help me out here.
Very good. Then I suggest that we go to another question we received, and this question is to you, Sabrina, because some people may argue that if the EU was to suspend horse meat imports on all, the very valid reasons you outlined in your presentation, the trade would go somewhere else. What are your views on that? And why do you think that should not be an argument to not call on the EU to suspend the imports?
Well, South American countries already now do export horse meat to other continents. They already now export also to Asia or Russia. So this is already happening. However, the EU is the main customer of Argentinian and Uruguayan horse slaughterhouses. So most of the horse meat produced is actually going to the EU. And it can be expected if that trade was going to be suspended, because if the EU is going to suspend the imports, it can be expected that the number of slaughtered horses will reduce drastically. This is also what happened in Mexico before. There were 4 slaughterhouses slaughtering horses, and after the EU suspension, now there are only 2 left, and the numbers reduced significantly. Also, the numbers of US horses being transported on long distances from Texas to Mexico have reduced a lot. So there is, of course, there would be a reduction in numbers. And especially in Argentina, we have to bear in mind that a lot of horses are actually stolen for horse meat production. So stolen to meet the demands of Europe, mainly of Europe, as I said, is the biggest customer of these slaughterhouses. So if that trade was going to be suspended, it can be expected that far less horses will be stolen, and that horse owners in Argentina might be safer about their horses. They are living in constant fear that their horses are going to be stolen. So coming back to your question about if we should still ask for it, yes, I think we should, because as I said, it will reduce the numbers, and also it's important, in my opinion, that the EU ensures that its rules are respected, and if they are not, to suspend the import, not only for animal welfare, but also for consumer protection. Because with all these sport horses and stolen horses, nobody has an idea about their drug history, because there is no reliable traceability system in place. So it's not only because of animal welfare, but also for consumer protection that the trade must be suspended.
Thank you, Sabrina. That was really helpful. Another question to you is that you said that EU audit reports confirmed that the audits in Argentina, but also Uruguay, were manipulated. Can you explain how the EU inspectors realized this?
Yeah, so in Uruguay, the inspectors asked the competent authority before the audit that they would like to visit 3 assembly centers, which belong to the slaughterhouses. In Uruguay, there are only 3 slaughterhouses, and each of them have run their own assembly centers right next to the plants. And they asked the competent authority that these should be in operation during the audit, so that they can, of course, assess how they are running. But then during the audit, all 3 assembly centers were empty. So it's obvious that the competent authority had alerted the slaughterhouses, and the slaughterhouses preferred to keep them empty than to show animals in bad condition. It happened that our team was there just before the audit, and we saw delegations of the ministry talking to the employees, talking to the slaughterhouse owners. They were there giving instructions. And we saw a lot of horses that were in bad condition and that were removed, as the one that I showed you on the photo. The severely injured horse was removed before the audit, and it was again there after the audit. And another thing is that the inspectors asked to see the registers of the assembly centers, and the registers showed clearly that there were horses present on every day, up to several hundreds before the inspection. Yet during the inspection, it was empty, so it's clear there was something wrong. In Argentina, the case was a bit different. The audit was actually about bovine and ovine meat, but the auditors requested during the opening meeting to also see a horse assembly center as a follow-up to a horse audit the year before. And they requested the competent authority that all horses that are present now should stay there until they go and visit a couple of days later. And the competent authority agreed to this. But then on the day of the visit, they realized that all horses had been exchanged.
Thank you, Sabrina. And this is indeed extremely worrying. You are calling for suspension of imports. What would be needed to get this right? What would the EU authorities need to do to ensure proper traceability and to tackle all the issues you just mentioned? And is that even feasible, you think?
At the moment, it's not feasible, in my opinion, because of the legislations in these countries. They are not up to EU level. For example, with transport, in Argentina, horses can be transported for 36 hours without provision of water and feed. And also at the slaughterhouses, there is no requirement to kill downer animals on the spot where they lie. So at the moment, the legislation is not to the EU level, also not for traceability, because it relies on the declarations of owners and dealers, which is totally unreliable. And it has been shown that these are easily falsified, and stolen horses are delivered to slaughterhouses with falsified declarations. So the first thing I think is that these countries need to improve their legislation, but it's not only to improve the legislation, then the enforcement is the most important part of it. It doesn't help to have good legislation if it's not enforced. And that's another problem in Argentina, where it's well known that corruption is a problem. If you have a look at the corruption scale of Transparency International, it's Argentina is quite high. So, and there have been cases in the past where the competent authorities were involved in a business with stolen horses, like giving falsified documents, for example. So these issues would have to be solved. The corruption issues, then the enforcement. So I think we are still a long way away from the fact that Argentina or Uruguay could be really on an EU level. And as long as this level is not reached, the only possible solution in my eyes is to suspend the import.
Yeah, thank you. It sounds indeed like these are massive challenges. Is that different in Canada and Australia? Sonja, would you like to come in? Do you think that if the EU was to improve enforcement, that the situation could potentially improve?
Well, I can only second what Sabrina said in regards to Argentina, because in Canada, it's quite the same. We do have these super long transports of 28+ hours, and the enforcement is also very, very questionable, as our investigations have shown. So I think, yeah, unless there are significant changes in that country, in Canada itself, it's not feasible.
No, that's very clear. And how is that for Australia, Elio? Do you think we could get it right if the EU and Australia would invest a lot more in proper enforcement? Could you unmute yourself?
Sorry about that. Look, the situation in Australia is exactly the same as it is in other countries, that there isn't the will to properly enforce what's happening from when the horses are brought through to transport to these abattoirs. And there's no will from the government, there's no will from the people that work there, the abattoir itself. And it's going to require a lot of will from all of those people to make it happen, but it's simply not going to happen because it would be too expensive to do so. So unless the EU really clamps down hard on the Australian government and introduces that really tough legislation, and as Sabrina has mentioned, enforcement is really important. And I can tell you that, having spoken to some of the kill buyers here in Australia, they think that the declaration, the horse vendor declaration form, is a joke. And I can tell you right now, there are horses that have come virtually straight from the racetrack. They're going to be killed our time tomorrow morning, which is in about 4 or 5 hours. Some of them have had, one horse in particular has had $5,000 or $6,000 of veterinary care spent on him. Who knows what drugs are in this horse right now, and he will be killed tomorrow morning and end up in the European Union most likely in the coming weeks.
Yeah, thank you, Elio. And indeed, it looks like this is not going to be, you know, a responsible situation anytime soon, if at all. Daniel, there's a question for you. Is there anything that concerned Canadian parliamentarians can do to assist with bringing this issue of the horsemeat trade to the attention with regard to the regulatory compliance under CETA? Do you have any views on that?
Well, I think we have to voice the concern. That's something we've been doing here in Europe with the European Commission, always asking to put this on the agenda. That's something that maybe MPs in Canada can also do from their side, because I'm understanding that so far there hasn't been very concerns there from the government, from regulatory forum to put it in the agenda. So maybe we can, that could be an option, a possible option for the future.
Yeah, so you would definitely welcome this. Very good. And then Daniel, another question to you, because we are now talking about suspension all the time. You were also floating the idea of calling for a ban. Could you elaborate a bit on that? Because we also know that this is not so straightforward in terms of WTO law.
Yes, indeed. About the ban on imports, actually looking at the, how happened with Mexico, it's very interesting because if you see the production in Mexico, since we have data from the beginnings of the 60s, production has always increased, except in 1999, I think, 2004, 2005. But the year after, production increased again. However, when the EU ban was implemented in 2014, as from that moment, production in Mexico started declining, slowly but continuously since then, and has not increased. So that's for the production. And then for the exports from Mexico, we have not seen that those exports have been replaced by other origins. There was a small increase in, from Argentina, but nothing compared to what we were expecting importing from Mexico. So somehow it did work. So that was a positive change. I would like to see more coherence in the EU approach on that, because we banned in Mexico from one reason, animal welfare and traceability and food safety, but we continue from Argentina for similar issues. So there is a lack of coherency perhaps that we need to improve, but it was good to see that the imports were not replaced by other origins. So it works sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. And to come back to a possible ban, how could this be possible? Because we know that at the moment there are also some perhaps legal obstacles for the EU to ban the imports, because that would be, of course, the most structural solution.
Well, indeed, the things that with Mexico, it was not a ban on imports per se. What happened there is that they did not renew the controls on residues. So the audit came negative from Mexico, and they showed that the controls were not effective. So they suspended that, and de facto suspended the imports on all derived products of horse meat.
All right, that's very clear. Thank you. Anja, as you have noticed, there are a lot of questions, so we are running a bit late, but we are now slowly coming to the end of this important session. There's also a question, and maybe you can come back to that, in fact. What does it really do with you to see all this footage? What does it do with you personally? That's a question from Ursula. And she also asked about the role of consumers. Like, are they aware of what is happening? And how could we also use the consumers' pressure to tackle this issue?
Well, thank you, Reineke. Let me start with the last question about consumers. There are in Europe a lot of consumers who don't want to eat horse meat. They just don't. But the problem is that most of the imported horse meat doesn't end up in the supermarket or in butcher shops. This horse meat is used in processed products, and only mainly the ones sold in cafeterias. So people do not go to a cafeteria and order some Belgian fries and another product and look at the box and see what the content is. So when they buy something, they usually think they are buying something made of pork or beef and don't realize that the majority of the meat in these products are horse meat. So a lot of consumers think, okay, I don't play a role in this issue. So we have to make them aware. And I think the report from from Eurogroup for Animals, for instance, and all the investigations done by other NGOs, I think they are very valuable in informing not only policymakers and legislators, but also European citizens in what is going on and the role they can play. And of course, petitions like the one we heard about with, I believe, 120,000 signatures already. That shows that European citizens really care about animals. And that brings me to the first question you asked. What does it do to me personally? Well, all these pictures we saw about horses and all the things we know about animal suffering all over the world were the main reason that my party, the Party for the Animals, was founded in the first place. And the way that we treat animals, for me personally, it is heartbreaking, simply heartbreaking to watch. And it makes me very sad and angry, but also a bit frustrated that the improvements are, well, it takes such a long time to get improvements on animal welfare on a European scale, on a national scale, but also on a global scale. I hope this answers.
Thank you. Yes, I could only echo that. We have a final question for Sabrina, and then I would like to ask you, Anja, to draw the meeting to a close. Sabrina, these audit reports are pretty clear that the EU can't guarantee the enforcement with the legislation, and that there is no traceability, and that there are serious issues. Why are things not changing?
That is the question that we are asking ourselves and also to the EU Commission. So far, we have not yet received a satisfactory reply from the EU Commission. Well, as I said before, my suspects are that it could have to do with the free trade agreements. I know from another project, it is about the PMSG, the hormone from pregnant mares, where the EU Commission said that in the context of Mercosur free trade agreement, they prefer dialogue and cooperation to improve animal welfare than import bans or suspension. But well, we are of the opinion that if 10 years of dialogue and cooperation did not improve the situation, it's time to act, and it's time to at least suspend until all the requirements are met. And we are also asking for, as I said during my presentation, not only to ask for EU standards at slaughter, but in the future, it is important to include transport and assembly centers, because the conditions there are also very, very poor and very hard for the horses. And a lot of horses already die at these stages before even arriving at the slaughterhouse. And another problem is, of course, that the audits of the EU Commission are always announced. They never carry out unannounced audits. But at least when they realize by themselves that the audit has been manipulated and they have been deceived, at least this is the moment where you should take action.
Yes, thank you so much, Sabrina, for explaining that to us and for all the important work you and Sonja and Elio are doing. Anja, it seems that it's very important that the European Parliament and the Intergroup stays very active on this file, because who else is going to hold the Commission to account on this? So can you maybe remind everyone what you have been doing and what you will continue to do in the future?
Yes, thank you so much, Reineke. Well, we have heard our speakers today go through the terrible situation of horses in Australia, North America, in Argentina, Uruguay. and all the animal welfare issues and food safety concerns in these different locations. And we can conclude without any doubt that urgent actions needs to be taken. And I strongly call on stakeholders involved to continue working to put an end to the suffering of these majestic and highly sensitive animals. And for that purpose, I would also like to point out that I have proposed a number of amendments to the upcoming Farm to Fork initiative report on the import of malicious horse meat. And I call on all my colleagues to support these amendments to finally get the Commission to act on this issue. And if any representative of the European Commission is watching, we are still waiting. 30 MEPs from all political groups in the European Parliament. We are waiting for 3 months now for an answer on to our written question. And so please, European Commission, answer these questions. That's the least you can do. And the second thing, you should be aware, European Commission, that the members of the Animal Welfare Intergroup will not stop and will not rest until you stop importing horse meat from countries that do not comply with EU legislation on food safety, on animal welfare and traceability. So I want to thank all the participants for attending today and asking questions, for our panelists again on all the different continents to be with us today. We hope to see you soon in future discussions on this topic. And for now, I wish you all a very nice day. Bye.